morning, everyone. It's really my honor to be the moderator for the very first keynote speakers of the conference. And it's very exciting to see many familiar faces in the audience, okay? And it is also another honor of me to introduce our first keynote speaker. Our first keynote speaker is Professor Muge Satar from Newcastle University, UK. And thank you very much for traveling all the way from UK to Taichung, okay? And Professor Sartar's specialization focus on TELL, of course, but with a particular focus on communicative and pedagogical aspect of multimodal interaction. In fact, when I was working on my publication on video conferencing, I remember I actually read a lot of your papers, especially the one that was published in Recall in 2016, the one on comparison between video conferencing and desktop, the one on multi-model interaction. Okay, all right. Thank you for giving me the inspiration. And today, she is going to talk to us on the topic of social presence in multimodal online language learning environment. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our first keynote speaker, Professor Satar.
Okay, now. Ni hao. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm very, very delighted to see Taiwan and Taichung, and I had the pleasure to spend a few days in Taipei. That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Alan Hung, for the lovely, lovely introduction, and my grateful thanks to Dr. Mei Ling Liao, my dearest colleague for a number of years from Europol and CALICO and the World Organizations of Computer Language Learning, and the wonderful committee here today who organized a fantastic program. I looked at the program, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I'm really looking forward to all the talks during the 2 days, next 2 days. So thank you very much for being here this morning with us as well, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about social presence, but I would like to start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a spirited young boy named Murat who attended a bustling primary school. Well, maybe he's secondary school age. Every day, he eagerly ventured to school and he absorbed a world of new ideas and knowledge at school. Murat particularly liked his English classes. There, he freely expressed himself, told stories about his life, made jokes with his friends, and talked about his favorite foods, least favorite foods, and his emotions. He really liked talking about his feelings. However, one day, everything changed when a tiny, spiky virus came into the world, bringing the normal life to a standstill. Suddenly, Murat found himself confined to his room, to his home, and the vibrant classroom he knew was no longer there, and it was reduced to small, pixelated images of hundreds of images on a computer screen. And he missed the in-person interactions, which were no longer possible in the classroom, that he used to play and chat with his friends. That was no longer there. And this new reality left Murat feeling isolated and disconnected from the rest of the world, from his friends, and from his teachers. And his joy he once found in learning English began to fade. Then, recognizing the emotional toll on his students that this environment was creating, his teacher started to explore innovative pedagogies. And he discovered a concept known as social presence. And he immediately began integrating it into the online classes. This approach emphasized creating an environment and creating a sense of community and connectedness among the members and the students, even in a virtual environment. The teacher introduced interactive activities, let the students collaborate, ask each other questions, and allowed them time to complete the task at their own pace. The teacher also included activities allowing the students to express agreement and disagreement, identify commonalities amongst each other, and compliment each other, give each other praise, and tell each other what they like. Finally, the teacher showed them how to use their webcams to the others, use their gestures, facial expressions, and how to be more present online. They were then allowed to make jokes, even in Zoom and video conferencing, when you had to unmute yourself all the time, remember not to be on mute, and share personal information and sometimes talk about things which were not directly related to the task at hand. So slowly, Murat started to feel connected again, and the joy was back, and this sense of isolation started to diminish. And he was still looking at his computer screen, but he rediscovered his love for English and identified the connections with his friends and the teachers. So that's social presence. That's the effect it creates on people. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. But if you miss any part of the talk, don't be afraid, don't fear. It is actually going to be published in an edited volume by my dear colleagues Regina Hampel and Ursula Stitter. And it's coming out in a couple of months, I believe. It's a lovely, lovely volume, really nice, interesting chapters on technology-enhanced language learning. So I do invite everyone to explore the book at your own pace. Okay, social presence is important, at least for me and some colleagues, because online environments do not offer the same affordances as present in-person context. The online environment can be quite different. Teachers also need to find strategies to offset the lack of physical interpersonal connections when they are working online. It has been found by research that social presence can enhance learner satisfaction, it can improve natural communication, and it can help us maintain a sense of connectedness. It can also reduce feelings of isolation and improve active participation. Klimova and her colleagues' research have shown us that social presence can help us avoid social distancing between learners and teachers, and it can help us sustain interaction and participation. However, a large body of research looks at social presence on asynchronous, text-based interactions on discussion boards, and there is very little looking at the multimodal elements of synchronous and asynchronous interaction. But we really need to be able to most effectively establish social and maintain social presence. We really need learners and teachers to engage in digital communication fully by employing all aspects of their communicative repertoire and all aspects of their multimodal identities and multiple identities. But why do we need social presence specifically in online interactions in language learning settings? In an article in 2015, I summarized this around 4 main points. So in language learning and teaching, language learning occurs not through interaction, but in interaction. And this makes social interaction not only a social necessity, but it becomes a core requirement of language learning. Second, key features of social presence, such as self-disclosure and expression of emotions and opinions, are usually not discretionary. Most of the tasks we use in language learning and teaching do ask learners to talk about themselves, to talk about emotions, and to talk about what they did yesterday. Third, learners' existing level of language and their existing level of proficiency may impact the ways they can participate in the community and express themselves. And finally, language learners in online education tend to come from more diverse cultural backgrounds than those in a physical classroom setting who already live in a local area. And this may mean that they bring a wider range of interactional competencies example, they will have different turn-taking practices, they might have different levels of understandings of politeness markers, or they might have different markers of social status or empathy. And this may in turn impact how they project their social presence and how they interpret others' social presence in online interaction. So a little bit of the concept. So what is it? What really is social presence? It was a term first coined in 1976, so it's not such a recent term. And Short and their colleagues were looking at mediated conversations. And mediation, they meant telephones. They were really looking at how people communicate using the new technology, the new medium of telephone conversations. And when I do that, I know it doesn't make sense to all of you. Some of you do this, I guess, now, to indicate the telephone. I still do that. It's still that. That for me. So they said social presence is the degree of salience of the other person in the interaction and the consequent salience of the interpersonal relationship. So within this view, social presence is a quality of the communications medium. So it's the capacity of the medium. So in this sense, in their research, it's the capacity of the telephone to be able to transmit information about facial expressions, direction of looking, posture, dress, and nonverbal cues. And they said these are missing in telephone conversations. So without these cues, how do we actually communicate with others at a social and emotional level? Then in the early 2000s, we had the Community of Inquiry framework introduced by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer. And with Rourke, they defined social presence as the ability of learners to project themselves socially and affectively into a community of inquiry. And within the context of online language learning, based on the definition of community of inquiry, I define social presence as social, emotional, and intercultural connectedness among language learners and teachers, which is forged and nurtured by their ability to project or express themselves and interpret or understand other selves through available semiotic and often multimodal means in the environment. And this definition aligns really well with humanistic approaches to language teaching, such as the approach of instructional conversations introduced by Carla Meskill and Natasha Anthony, in which the focus is really on the people and their feelings, their individual expressions, and their emotions, taking the whole person approach. So you treat all students and the teachers and everyone in the community as real people. And this requires expression and understanding of social, emotional, and cultural meanings among all participants. So in a way, social presence is the human touch. It's what AI cannot give you. It's what we all seek for in life. We seek for connections among people at a human level. So although during the next 2 days, we'll be talking about new technologies and their high impact on us, my message is that let's not forget that it's not the technology, it's the people who are using the technology and the environment where the technologies are used that our interest is in education. Okay, here is the Community of Inquiry framework, and in my studies I've used their framework to study and understand social presence. So social presence is really only one component of the educational environment, and it was the ideas started based on the educational philosophers' ideas of Charles Peirce's and John Dewey's ideas of learning and teaching. And in language learning and teaching, it does align with Vygotski's sociocultural framework really well. And in this framework, cognitive presence, teaching presence, and social presence together make the optimal environment and the optimal conditions for learning and teaching. And it was really developed for distance education. So when you have interactions in language learning, it wasn't on language learning and teaching, it was in general education, how technologies mediate education. And Rourke, Garrison, Anderson, and Archer developed 3 categories for us to be able to identify and understand whether there is social presence or not in an online community. And out of the 3 categories, the affective category includes indicators such as expression of emotions, use of humor, and self-disclosure. The interactive categories, the first three really include very specific elements that are relevant in discussion boards, so how you actually continue a thread in a discussion board, how you answer to people. But when you then adjust this in video conferencing, for example, it's about how you interact with others. So how you ask questions, whether you compliment and express appreciation and express agreement. In terms of the cohesive categories, they have indicators around use of vocatives, which are people's names, whether you address them by their names, or addressing to the group using inclusive pronouns such as we, us, ours. And fatics and salutations like greetings, happy new year, good morning. Although we think they are small words, they mean a lot. They make a lot of sense in interaction and communication. So based on this, back in 2015, I proposed a qualitative, exploratory, and heuristic framework to investigate social presence in online multimodal language learning and teaching. At the time when I was doing the study for my PhD back in 2010-11, there was nothing on video conferencing. It was very, very few research that was looking at video-mediated interactions. The technology was new. It was really Skype, and then there was MSN Messenger, a little bit introducing video conferencing. Then I used a technology called Uwu, which was able to record. It was the first one that you could record video interactions, and video interactions were stable. It was then discontinued, and it looked very similar to Zoom. And the name also is similar, so I'm guessing, maybe it was a small niche group of people who sold their idea to Zoom. I'm guessing they're now millionaires. I'm not, unfortunately. They are. Okay. So what I did was to take the three categories of affective, interactive, and cohesive categories from Rourke, Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, and think about what it means in video conferencing settings. And I relabeled affective interactions as building intimacy, interactive indicators as sustaining interaction, and cohesive indicators as establishing intersubjectivity. And these all operate within a context of multimodality. There are beliefs about online communication and foreign language learning, and all of which are intertwined with participant states of apprehension, which can be anxiety, negatively, or nervousness, or relaxation, about how the students and participants feel in these contexts. And in online multimodal communication, social presence is impacted by four aspects. First, by lack of eye contact, lack of proximity, and lack of touch. Secondly, by embodied resources such as smiles, gestures, facial expressions, and posture, and how much of that you can relay. Whenever I meet anyone in person, if they met me online first, they say, "Oh, you're tall. You look very small on the screen." So they never guess how I look. And I can never guess how people look. Sometimes there are people I meet online, and when I see them in person, I'm like, "Is this really you? You look totally different." Some people are more photogenic. I think they're very lucky. They look exactly the same. But all of these things, although you have your smiles and expressions, they are different somehow when they become transported into the two-dimensional screens on our computers. Third, it is affected by communication features, for instance, humor, inclusive pronouns, and off-task talk. How many of you talk outside the main task? Like, think of an online meeting. You start, you're very much on task, you finish, you rarely go off task when you're meeting on Zoom or Teams or other platforms or for multimodal communication. But if you met at a cafe or in an office, there is more of that. You're more relaxed, you kind of introduce other things, you're able to interact at different levels. And finally, feelings of anxiety, responsiveness, empathy, friendliness, and warmth. They're also very difficult to express, and they're different how you do these things online. So that's where I come from. Let's check the time. Maybe I'll go a bit more quickly. So if you're still following, and if you're ready, I shall move on to the first context that I'll introduce to you today. So we've got two contexts, bear with me. The first one is virtual exchange. And I'd like to start with a little bit of what virtual exchange is, if you haven't heard the term, but you might have heard telecollaboration, online intercultural exchange, collaborative online international learning, or COIL, tandem and e-tandem. So there are many, many different terminologies that different people have used in other disciplines. And just around COVID, a couple of scholars came around, all these different people using different terminologies, and decided one term, decided on one term that we are going to use going forward. We said it will be virtual exchange. There are other people who think it's not the best term. Fine, you can still use others. But there is now the International Virtual Exchange Conference every year that's been organized. I had the pleasure of organizing the second conference, and I had to do it online, but hey. So it is a term that we use now. So it is an educational practice that involves the engagement of groups of learners in extended periods of online intercultural interaction and collaboration with usually international peers as an integrated part of their educational programs or under the guidance of educators and or facilitators. And this is Robert Dowd's definition in 2020. Again, there are other definitions that you can find. But simply put for me, it is the guided online intercultural learner-to-learner contact. So it's not online teaching, it's not delivery from a teacher to a group of other people. It's really the learners interacting together. I think that's the core. And a lot of people have argued that virtual exchange is an effective educational tool for internationalization at home. So it can be incorporated into different settings. A lot of people argue that it's environmentally sustainable, accessible, and equitable, especially compared to physical mobility. It can support meaningful interaction and digital competences, but it can also help with the employability or the 21st century skills like self-esteem, curiosity, intercultural sensitivity, a reflection on beliefs and behaviors, the ability to see complexity, and awareness of binary categories of us and them, which are not always things that we think of in our objectives when we design our classes. And again, quoting Robert Dowd, we do need virtual exchange, especially in recent times, because in a world increasingly characterized by the rise of right-wing extremism, religious fanaticism, and populist political movements, virtual exchange will have an important role to play as educators strive to develop active, informed, and responsible citizens who are tolerant of difference and who are actively engaged in political and democratic processes. So virtual exchange is a great tool for language learning and teaching. You get to speak to the people that you're learning the languages and of and the culture of, but it also serves a higher purpose for democracy and world peace. Okay, the data I'm going to show to you today, very briefly, comes from a curriculum embedded virtual exchange for TESOL, it's an MA degree in TESOL, over the last 5 years, not last, but yeah, until 2021, between a university in the UK, you might guess which university that is, and a university in Turkey, well, 2 universities in Turkey actually. And this specific data comes from the exchanges into 2021. And the focus of virtual exchange is around being able to provide students with experiential learning practices. So they are going to become English language teachers, and the idea is to give them an experience of participating in virtual exchange as a language learner or as an English as a lingua franca speaker, so that they can kind of predict what their students might experience when they ask them to do different tasks, when they ask them to meet somebody online for the first time, on video conferencing or in other tools, and then experience what it feels like really, experience what their students might feel or how they might react and engage and interact. In the UK, also in Turkey, it's a non-assessed component. A lot of virtual exchange programs like COIL specifically would like you to assess. The assessment is an important feature of virtual exchange. I'm quite against assessing. These kind of a very qualitative and interaction where you engage with people at a very personal and intimate level. Now I'll be very happy to talk about it during the break. It's not that topic now, so I'll move on. So in the UK, we have international students, and in a specific cohort, we had 5 students from China, 2 students from Saudi Arabia, and 1 student from Qatar. And in terms of the tasks, they completed 3 tasks over 6 weeks. The first one was a whole group asynchronous Padlet board interaction. I don't know whether you've heard of Padlet. It's a website. There's like a page. Okay, I see head notes, so I'll continue. I guess you know that. So they basically posted their introductions using text, videos, or images, and they posted likes and dislikes around them. And then they met as a group for 1 hour on Zoom. And what we did there is we asked them to share each other their cultural artifacts, to bring along an artifact that they use in their culture and briefly talk about it and share it. In the next task, we asked them to get in small international groups, and we asked them to create and share digital cultural artifacts on the Enact web app. I don't expect any one of you to have heard of that. We created the web app at Newcastle University as part of an EU project, and I'm going to very briefly show what it does in a moment. So in the second part, they created their activities in local small groups. Sorry, they're not doing that in the second activity internationally. They're doing it locally. So with their peers, they come together to create a cultural activity of their own country or culture or personal experience on the website. And in the third task, we then asked them to come back to the international groups in small groups on Zoom after having looked at each other's activities, then talk about the activities further. So use the platform really as scaffolding for further intercultural dialogue and sharing. And at the end of each task, we gave them an e-portfolio, and we asked them to have reflections about their feelings and understandings of social presence. So it is really data-led reflection. So we asked them to bring together examples as well. So at the first task, when we asked them to bring their cultural objects, we kind of realized that they were talking about culture differently. Their understanding of what culture is was different. For some of them, they treated culture as facts and information. Others looked at culture as something that you belong to or live with. And some of them looked at culture as something one does. So I'm going to play a very short clip giving examples of each of these categories.
I will choose the dragon. I think the dragon is the symbol of the China, and we are called the sons or the sons of the dragon. I think I will not choose an object, rather an activity. For example, you spend one special occasion like Spring Festival, you will get a taste of what actually Chinese culture is.
I used to play this game with my friends when we were young, and also with my family. We also have the mandala board with us at home right now. It's a very nice activity.
So these were the different understandings of what culture is. There's a paper in progress looking at this in more detail, and I'll be happy to share with you some of the examples. So seeing culture is something one does comes from Claire Cramshan, whose ideas of culture as semiotic practice. But yeah, happy to share references afterwards if you're interested.
I will choose.
Okay. So here is the web app. It's called www.enacteuropa.com. If you go online, it's a free web app. Anyone can join, anyone can sign in and create their activities. It was created by funding from an EU grant. We're still able to keep up the website, and we're hoping to do so for the next 10 years. So when you go on the page, at the very top, you see here the menus, and when you click on Learn, you see this kind of a page where we got some editor's choice activities, one from Catalan, Barcelona, Rosa de San Jordi, one from Turkey, which I created. I'm Turkish, by the way, and there's a shadow puppets that I believe we stole from this part of the world. And then we've got two activities from the UK. And then when you go back, you actually see a full list of activities. We've got more than 100 of them now, from more than 25 countries and 25 languages, and we're very happy that it's been accessed by more than 150 countries. At least that was the Google profile showing us that there was at least one person from that country who's accessed it. And I looked at what we have from Taiwan. So we have the Shabo, is that how you call it? And I believe Dragon Boat Festival is approaching. So we have that there. We've got the bubble tea. How to mention Taiwanese bubble tea. We don't have a traditional tea ceremony yet, or we don't have any other activities. It's only two. So if any one of you is interested in creating your Taiwanese activities or any of your activities from your homeland, your culture in your own languages, feel free to go to the website. Once you log in and create an account, you see here you will have another menu called Create, and the app will guide you to create your own activities. And you've got lots of user guides, and you can always contact me on my up information or questions that will help you understand what the activity is about. And then it's still at pre-task stage. We've got a vocabulary section that introduces you the key items that you need to be able to engage with the activity. Then for the main task stage, you have another interactive video at which you can follow the on-screen instructions to follow step by step and reenact the activity yourself. You can recreate it yourself. And at the post-task stage, we have a drag and drop activity for revision of the vocabulary items, but we also have a comment section where users can then go on and tell each other what they've learned about the language, the cultural activity, and they can post their own reenactments of what they thought. So the Saudi students created this activity of sword dance, and then in Turkey, one of the female participants kind of dressed up in the same way, using the props they can find at home, and then posted their picture, almost making it their own. It was quite interesting to then hear how they communicated about this activity on the Zoom, because the Saudi students then said, well, actually, women don't dance. This sword dance is only men. And the way they discussed gender issues in their cultures and gender equality and what it means for different activities being done by different people was really, really interesting. We got the Chansong, my pronunciation is horrible, the traditional Chinese dress. Chongsong, yes, thank you very much, Victor. Again, the students explore sustainable development goals and gender equality and how actually the dress meant more equality for women, which many people don't know about. So although the website looks like, oh, it's lots of tea and food and coffee and very childlike activities, there are also activities that engage with certain very difficult topics that you can use as a scaffolding afterwards for further interactions. So, okay, what I'm going to now show you is examples around 3 of the themes that came up around social presence and how the students felt in this virtual exchange, or what they thought about social presence in their reflections. So there were a lot of comments around apprehension and anxiety, especially those students who felt their foreign language skills were really weak and weren't confident enough. They felt a higher level of anxiety, especially when they started. So one of them said, I really want to express my thoughts, but I feel very nervous. Another one who really perceived their oral English to be poor, they said, when I shared ideas, everyone just listened to me carefully with a friendly smile. And I think being tolerant is the foremost for the exchange with communication with different cultures. So the importance of silence in media communication, which we cannot always tolerate. We just want to talk all the time, but that silence is really valuable in online settings. There were comments around complimenting and expressing appreciation. They basically said it was important for building intimacy and sustaining interaction, that when others complimented, they just had the urge to share more, and they felt they were kind of supportive, a quality which they appreciated. The fact that students were able to use different modes of communication fostered positive feelings because they could see how others feel. And smiles were particularly instrumental in creating a friendly and cozy atmosphere. It helped them feel secure and happy, and which showed that nobody was judging others. In terms of interactional practices, participants reported being able to understand and know those participants who were more active in the group. A number of participants talked about one specific participant, participant 13, who showed interest in both the other students' culture and personal thoughts by asking many questions. And they felt understood and connected to those students. Sorry, I'm reading the same thing again. Especially the same student when they talked about their camping adventure on a desert and not talking about the task at all, something they've done differently. And when they commented almost on every post and gave them extra information about themselves, so a lot of self-disclosure was important. Ofta's talk was highly valued for feeling connected. So although you can't have a cup of coffee together in person, it's still important to talk about other things than what the task is at hand. So they said they felt most connected when they were able to share personal interests outside of the task, such as anime, football, food, Mandarin pop music, and other topics. And they felt, when they found out they played the same computer game, they they allowed them to form a bond with the other person. Two more themes, more related to the web app now. Sharing objects came up as important during the exchanges. They said sharing personal, cultural information through concrete objects made them easier to connect and exchange ideas because they could show physical and concrete examples of their cultures. So this student is participant 10, and she was from the university in Turkey. I don't know whether you recognize this blue bead. It's very commonly used in Greece and Turkey. It's called an evil eye bead. We use it to fend off the evil spirits. So you really use it somewhere visible and you think, okay, now I'm protected. So she was talking about this evil eye bead, and the participants from the UK institution then showed their bracelets, saying, oh, I've actually got this, it does the same job, it protects me from evil spirits. And then this student, participant 10, and these are 14 and 17, she said when participants 14 and 17 showed us their special bracelet, I felt the exact feeling of protection from the elders. When I was a little kid, my grandfather made me carry an amulet in which there were little pieces from Quran, from the Holy Book of Wisdom. She's Islam, she's Muslim apparently. He believed that this amulet would make me a brave person, thus the bracelets reminded me of my amulet. So there was this feeling that you were able to feel the same things through objects. And finally, this concept of sharing and reenacting the digital artifacts as new forms of semiosis appeared to alleviate some of the challenges imposed by a lack of common language and social-cultural background. For instance, participants conveyed genuine everyday individual experiences of coffee cup reading and fortune-telling by looking at the remains of the coffee in your cup. But there was also experiences of national cultural heritage activities like the sword dance I mentioned. But there were also intangible values, such as those evoked by the symbolic meanings of the lotus flower. The reenactment of the activities increased social, cultural, and emotional involvement through resemiotization. And in Idama's words, quoting from her 2003 article, resemiotization describes how meaning shifts from context to context, from practice to practice, or from one stage of practice to the next. So here, all the participants recreate the lotus flower, recreate the dance in one context and resemiotize it in another context. So the participants said that when they recreated the folding paper activity, they understood the creators of the lotus flower best because they reproduced it themselves. And the reenactments also facilitated common ground. For instance, they said, the Turkish culture has a similar dance. Even though the outfits and the way the dancers perform are different, both cultures love dancing with a sword and show they're proud and how strong they are through this dance. And they said the moment when I felt most involved was when I discovered similarities between coffee cup reading in Turkish, the Turkish culture, and pathology in Chinese culture. Is it reading the tea leaves? I guess. So you'll have to tell me during the break what pathology is about. Okay, so this concludes the first context. And if you've started sleeping, I'd like to ask you a question which is not related to the presentation. Are you a fan of Star Wars? The movie series? Have you heard of it? Okay, you heard of Jedi? Have you heard of Yoda? Okay, for the next section, we will let Yoda lead the way. You are wise. Okay, and this takes us to the second context, synchronous online one-to-one tutoring. And this data comes from I've got one slide to introduce you to the concept of instructor social presence versus instructor teaching presence. So remember, the community of inquiry has social, cognitive, and teaching presence. And so our focus is on social presence, but it is linked very much to to social presence. So lots and lots of research looks at social presence as a quality of the community or the group, but there is some research that focuses specifically on the teacher and the social presence of the teacher, because teachers' active participation can increase social presence in the group, and it can maximize learning opportunities. It can also diminish feelings of isolation and encourage active participation. However, the terminology is a bit different and sometimes mixed, especially in language learning and teaching contexts. So Nicola Guichon and Kathy Cohen in 2014 used the term online teacher presence. So they're talking about the presence of the teacher, but they didn't necessarily specify whether it's the social presence of the teacher or the teaching presence of the teacher. So if you really look at each person, what your learners can have teaching presence when they collaborate with other students and when they teach other, summarize things and engage cognitively and teach other things. They can have social presence, they can also have cognitive presence. Same with the teacher. So Richardson and Lowenthal in 2017 made that point, and they said we really need to distinguish between instructor social presence and instructor teaching presence. And they have a very simple definition. They say instructor social presence is simply the social presence of the instructor. I don't know whether that tells you much. That was the simplest definition they gave. So I'd like us to look at these two concepts now, the instructor's social presence and the instructor's cognitive presence in a way. So this data comes from work I've done with Cara Bigum, and we published a short monograph in last year this time with Routledge. The last chapter of the book is open access on the publisher's website, and we looked at instruction giving in online language lessons, specifically by experienced online language teachers. So we collected the data back in 2018, that was pre-COVID. So a lot of the teachers were still using Skype at the time, and we contacted teachers on a platform where it matches learners with teachers across the world, and you can choose a teacher that you want to learn with. And each teacher did 3 lessons with 2 English language learners. And the task that I'm going to show you data from is a compare and contrast task. It's about learners comparing and contrasting SPARK packages for a colleague as a leading present, and then to decide which present to buy. It's kind of a very typical compare, contrast, and decision-making task that we use in language learning and teaching. And although the teachers gave instructions differently, I think it is important to emphasize that all learners completed the task successfully. So in terms of their learning outcomes, they all achieved the learning outcomes. But how they felt and how the experience went was slightly different. So I'll share 2 extracts from 2 teachers. We called them Karen and Craig, and this is Karen. And she had about 5,000 lessons already on the platform. And she'd been teaching online for about 5 years when we collected the data, and she had 5-star ratings. And she was trained, fully trained with a TEFL and a CELTA certificate. The learners were Gonja, the female student, and Errol, the male student. And we interviewed the teachers about their teaching practices, about their understandings of instructions and what they did. So she emphasized learners' cognitive development, and she emphasized a lot of the topics you get in a CELTA certificate, like elicitation and feedback and guiding the students. So she said, I always try to get them to think about what to do first. It's elicitation. Rather than telling them you should do the exercise like this, I'm trying to always have a focus on getting them to become independent learners. She also said, when I'm asking a question, I'm looking like I want an answer. I don't know how you do that, but you can look like you want an answer, apparently, even on Skype. And she said, I definitely use hand gestures. That really helps the students. And this is the other teacher, Craig. Again, he had full certification. He was fully trained. He had had some in-person teaching, and he was teaching for 2 years online when we collected the data. And he had about 1,500 lessons already completed online, a lot of lessons. And he also had 5-star rating from the learners. The 2 learners he engaged with were Didam and Edam, and they were both female, and you can see they were quite happy during the classes. So Craig said, while Karen highlighted cognitive development of the learners, Craig's focus was more on the social and emotional engagement of the learners. He said, I plan the topics because tasks and activities are mostly just conversation. So he said, I keep them happy first, and then I teach them English second. So his priority is really the feelings of continuation and being happy to be there in class. He said you'll notice that gestures and facial expressions are much more animated than you would normally expect in a classroom because you're missing so much of the body language you would normally have. And he said if they say something interesting, I write it down. So he writes down any mistakes, any errors they might be making to be able to give delayed feedback at the end. But he also writes down any interesting kind of side points that I want to kind of interject later on. So earlier on, if they've said they're studying this subject, he brings the subject later on. So he really pays attention to what the learners are saying and communicating. So here are two short clips. They're both 3.5 minutes long. I'm only going to play about a minute and a half to give you a flavor of what actually happens here. If you go to this URL, it's extract 2. If you wanted to scan the QR code, it will take you directly to a transcript, a multimodal transcript of the extracts, full extracts. And when I do a quick analysis, I will refer to the full extracts, but you don't really have to look at it, but it's there. It might look like a small figure when you first scan the QR code, but you can click on it, make it bigger, and you can see the details. But you don't really need to read it now, but that's available there. Okay, so I'll first play Craig for a little bit.
Exactly. So, imagine, hypothetical situation, yeah? Imagine your BFF. What's a BFF? Have you seen that before?
Yes, best
Yeah.
friend forever.
Best friend forever. It's very American. Yeah, it's very American. But in England, we adopt Americanisms. We adopt it, yeah? So I'd like you to imagine that your BFF is changing from her university course. You guys are presumably on the same courses, yeah? Your best friend has decided that she wants to change her course, yeah? She's going to disappear from your life, or at least to a different classroom, yeah? How would you like to celebrate that? What would you do for your best friend to help her celebrate that she's moving to a different course? Would you buy a gift? Would you go for dinner? What would you do?
I would go for a dinner.
Okay, that's a good choice. I like dinner. Dinner is good, yeah. Yeah. Very good. Some small thing to celebrate. Yeah. Something like that. Well, that's good because what we're going to look at now is a kind of a case study. Yeah. This is a case study about a lady who's leaving her job and she's going to move into a different job, and her colleagues and her friends at work, they want to celebrate. They want to give her a gift or something like that. Yeah. When I say case study, what do I mean?
It's kind.
I'll pause it here, and I'll move on to Karen a little bit so that you can have a feel of what she does as well. She's quieter, or maybe it's my recording that's quieter. I do apologize. So especially at the back, if you can't hear clearly, I do apologize. But it's all there on the transcript is all there online.
So, Erdem, once you've opened your website, what do you see?
Information about that test.
Good, that's perfect, that's perfect. What do you see? Stephen?
As for
Wait, thank you, thank you. Good, what do you see? You are student B, yes. That's fine. Okay. Now, the first thing we do. What's the first thing whenever we open a new exercise? What's the first thing we should do? When you open an exercise, what's always the first thing you should do?
you're reading
Read. Yes. So the first.
I look pictures.
Okay. Sure. So you can have a quick look. Have a quick look down. Really, really quick. Then, what you should do is you should first of all read the title. Yes. Title. So what is the title? Good. Information gap test. So there's going to be gaps in the information. Now we know that. What's the next thing that we do when we open a new exercise?
And I'll pause it there again. I don't know whether you have a different feel from the two different teachers, but for me we look at the indicators of social presence, we see quite a few differences.
Exactly. So,
For Craig, this is only a little bit of the transcript that you found in that QR code, but I'll refer to the other sections, but I'll tell you what happens there. So Craig had multiple instances of self-disclosure. So he acknowledged how Americanisms are adopted in England, in lines 409 and 412. He acknowledged vulnerability later on when he says, one of the students asked that he's studying physics, and he goes, oh, I don't know anything about physics. So he really says, and is able to say what he doesn't know and express some vulnerability. Then later on, he talks about when they're talking about where to get the gift from. He goes, oh, I don't know where you can get it, maybe Amazon. And he says, oh, I love Amazon. It's the fastest way for me to lose my money. So he's kind of very ironic there. He doesn't smile much, but he's a bit flat. So he's really saying, yeah, Amazon is great, and you just lose your money. And in terms of his embodied resources, which they contribute to the humorous effect. So he does very expressive eye and eyebrow movements. They move around the whole time. And he uses quieter voice. It says, it's very American, when he's kind of referring to the Americanisms in English. And he uses laughter and humor a lot throughout. And he uses natural facial expressions when he's doing irony. You can see the difference when he's making different kind of jokes, and he shifts his facial expressions quite a lot. He also uses many inclusive pronouns. He says, we are learning, what we've got here, we will read, here we go, we can see, so lots of we's. He also addresses the learners using their names. He does use, which becomes really important in online interaction anyway. And he introduces the task is something we will do together. So there is a lot of affective and cohesive indicators of social presence. And to start with, he invites learners to imagine and share what they would buy for a colleague or for a friend or their BFF, their best friend forever, if they were leaving the university, and what they would buy. So he really personalizes the task and gets them to think about their own experiences of shopping. And they also ask them to express their cultural information when he does that. What do you do in your own cultural specific context? He also asks a number of genuine questions, and by genuine I mean not known answer questions. So when you ask a question in the classroom, we do a lot of known answer questions, right? We know the answer and we still ask it and we say, good, perfect, good job. Whereas Craig asks real genuine questions. He doesn't know the answers to those questions. So when he says, what do you buy as a gift in your own context? He really has no idea. He's really there to listen and understand the learner. And he uses his embodied gestures for dramatic effect, for animated facial expressions in the extract. Throughout the images, 1 to 14, it's all very expressive. Like number 5 is one of my favorites. He goes like really expressive. And he uses direct eye gaze and lots of gestures. When we look at the learners, both learners also appear engaged, and they display bodily signs of relaxation, they smile, their posture, head nods, and nonverbal expressions are quite relaxed. We see a lot of laughter and smiles, images 3, 14, 16, and 17. And they have more serious facial expressions when Craig dramatizes some of the activities, like when their BFF is leaving, and they become a bit more serious, really engaged with what is being said. And then when Craig requests a response, they're again a bit more serious compared to the times when they really laugh and smile. So Karen, on the other hand, in line with her aims, remember Craig said keep them happy first? And it's really what he's doing there, he's keeping them happy first. And Karen said it's really the cognitive development that's really important, and she said she uses a lot of elicitation, and that's exactly what we see in the extract. So there is plenty of elicitation. If you look at the full transcript, lines 23, 28, 37, 46, 53, 61, 69, 96, so almost everything she says is elicitation, trying to elicit the information from the learners. She also manages turn-taking a lot. She says, you first, now you go, now you go. So that's lines 28, 32, 67, 87, 96. It's all about managing turn-taking. She gives a lot of positive feedback, like good, well done, very clear and short feedback, but she also gives some negative corrective feedback. And she does also use her gestures very effectively to achieve these goals. So she uses an iconic gesture when requesting one of the learners to stop, as you see there in image 3, 5, and 7. And later on, she uses thumbs up when confirming access to the information, so that's a metaphoric gesture. And she uses dynamic gestures when she says, oh, in all instructions, there is background information and there's instructions and background. So she kind of does that dynamically. However, in terms of the socio-emotional quality of her instructions, she doesn't really offer any personal information or opinion. She doesn't say anything about herself. She doesn't smile, she doesn't use humor much. Her facial expressions are positive, only with a single smile at the very end to give positive feedback. That's image 8, which is right after this on the transcript. And at other times, her facial expressions do not really project anything positive. There is only once when the learners identify the information gap correctly, Karen goes like, oh yes, information gap task, that's what we're going to do. There's only one time when she's really very happy, and that kind of feels a bit kind of non-authentic in a way. But she also uses, like Karen, she also uses the learners' names. But interestingly, when Craig Lowe uses learners' names, he's really asking genuine questions. When Karen uses names, she's mostly managing turn-taking. Errol, you go, and Gonja, you start now, start and stop, and it's all that. And Karen's role as a turn allocator becomes so foregrounded that when she says stop, stop, don't say it's next turn, then Errol, this boy, 3 times in the interaction, he asks whether he can speak now, so he asks for permission to take the floor. So a lot of Karen's questions as well are about elicitation. And it doesn't really invite the learners to project their social presence either. It doesn't invite learners to share any emotions, to talk about their own personalities, as she doesn't do herself. But it requires the learners to engage with the content cognitively, and she does that very well. So in terms of the learners, considering the learners' facial expressions, gestures, and posture, Gonja, the female student, again, is quite serious throughout. There's only one time when she smiles, when she gets positive feedback. Whereas Errol, in multimodal communication from psychology research, there's a term called self-adapters. It's when you touch yourself when you're stressed. So we see a lot of hand scratching. He touches his chin. And there is also a point when we see him bite his nails. So he feels a bit more stressed than other learners. Well, he was stopped basically. So, and there is one bit when he uses a paper as like a pan to cool down. Then the only time we see Errol producing a very slight smile is again when he got one positive feedback towards the very end. That's image 19 in the transcript. So I've got 5 minutes to wrap up. And what does this data show us? So both instructors used the text chat and their multimodal elements very effectively, and the affordances of the environment, they were both quite good. In terms of Craig, he had high social presence. So this is instructor's social presence, and this seemed to create a relaxed atmosphere with a natural flow of conversation, and learners seemed more socially, emotionally, and culturally present. Whereas Karen represented higher teaching presence. So this is instructor's teaching presence. She was very much engaged in the learner's cognitive engagement, but that also created some degree of pressure, and the interaction turned into a series of question and answers. So, takeaways. I'll have 2 takeaways from the 2 contexts I've talked about. In terms of virtual exchange, social presence is a quality of a person, and it is compatible with humanistic language teaching approaches such as instructional conversations. I really like their approach because it's really about understanding the learner, and in their book they do introduce different techniques of how you manage that, like correlating and saturating. It's like how Craig does it. You start with a general context about what do you normally do, and you slowly corral the learners to the task at hand, like corralling sheep. You take them to the right direction from a wider context. So meaning-making potentials of different media offer various affordances and challenges for establishing and sustaining social, cultural, and emotional connections. And future work on how digital cultural artifacts can enable conversations with high social-cultural involvement would help us understand what other things we can do, because you can't get learners to do a lot of things together on video conferencing. It's a lot of sitting and talking. It's a lot of discourse about other things, discourse about other discourse. But when you get them to create and do things, that it becomes different. So there is a bit of work that we can do there, so that we can facilitate more engaged and connected conversations in virtual exchange. In terms of the other context, which might be more relevant if you are teaching online, there are differences between instructors' teaching presence and instructors' social presence. And these really seem to be based on the distinct pedagogical preferences of the teachers, based on what they've told us that is important in their lessons. And it has different levels of impact on the learners. And there is a bit of work that we can do in task design as well as what the teachers do. So we can create tasks which ask learners to self-disclose and share emotions, but we also consider privacy, I guess. To what extent can we ask them to share, or to what extent should we not do that? I don't know whether any of you are working with displaced individuals and migrants, and that especially becomes challenging when your learners come from difficult, challenging backgrounds or have had traumatic experiences, which also happens in a lot of virtual exchange settings. All of a sudden, a war breaks out in the country where your partners are in the other country, or there is a pandemic, or there is an earthquake, and it changes the whole quality of the virtual exchange. So to what extent should we, or can we ask learners to open themselves up to increase social presence, so that we can better facilitate more engaged and connected conversations in online teaching? All right, I'll just display this. These are questions for you, actually. So these are the things, I guess, we need to think about both in intercultural and international exchanges and in synchronous online learning. So thinking about how we create safe spaces, how we find a balance between social presence and cognitive presence, and where it takes us. Sheshe, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for a very insightful presentation, and with a lot of concrete and specific examples. Okay, now the floor is open for questions and answer. We still have some time left, right? So we can take some questions from the audience. Okay, so do we have any questions for Professor Sattar? Okay, we got one.
Good morning, Professor Sattar. Good morning, everybody. My name's Con Alexio. I'm a student and as well as a teacher at Kaohsiung Normal University. And brief introduction, a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment involves teaching English teachers how to teach under the new regulations of Taiwan's bilingual education programs. And a lot of it's involving technology, and we're facing a lot of challenges, but actually it's happening. The teachers are starting to understand and figure out new ways how to implement the policy. Your talk was really interesting. The first half, I was writing down notes, and I had 3 questions, but by the time you got to the second half, you already answered 2 of my questions, so I'm only left with 1 question. My question is, in relation to virtual exchange and the ability to see complexities, there was a study that was carried out in China, where I used to study, and it was in relation to Greek language teaching. I'm actually Greek background, and it was from the Shanghai University of Foreign Languages, and it was a project called Project Odysseus. And back in 2009, they trialed online teaching for a group of students who really loved learning Greek language. And cut a long story short, when they asked for feedback at the end of the program, the 3 things that they found was that students wanted real textbooks. They weren't really used to the idea of digital or e-books. The students felt that some felt all right, but they were feeling that they were unable to get involved. But the question I have in relation to the ability to see complexities, and it's something I'm I'm trying to figure out how to do better at the moment is you mentioned about ability to see complexities, and one problem I'm facing at the moment is when it comes to teaching idiomatic expressions in English. Like, for example, we say in English to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's one of many. But during COVID, when I was in Australia, and by the way, I come from the most lockdown city in the world, Melbourne, Australia. We were locked down 253 days during 2021. We outdid China. So during that time, I was teaching English online, and we faced a lot of problems with idiomatic expressions. So my question is, how do we, when we're using technology, what are some techniques we can use to help students who are learning English to be able to better grasp idiomatic expressions, when normally if we're teaching face-to-face, we use a lot of analogies, we interact with students directly, they're looking for cues, visual cues, but when you're using a screen, a lot of that's gone, and I'm trying to research and figure out how we can do this better, using some of the context that you mentioned about virtual exchange. So that's my question. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'll be brief, and I guess if you're researching it, we'll be looking to you for the answers. And I'm sure there are lots of books around teaching idioms, which isn't really my focus. But in terms of multimodality, what I can say in instructional conversations, there's this concept of teachable moments. So if, as a teacher, if it comes out that you have an idiom that is the best fit, but you're kind of hesitating over the students understand, you can introduce that. Then you can use that moment as a teachable moment to explain the idiom in context, and also use the multimodal elements. So you type it in text chat while you're using the idiom. You can also have what they call a task toolkit, basically have a part of your screen and create your whiteboard online, like the way you would create your whiteboard in the classroom, almost like an H shape. So allowing a bit of space for those expressions to be written down as well. To me, idioms are best in context, but I'm not an expert on idioms, so I look forward to reading your work when it comes out. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions?
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Hongyi. Truly very insightful, and I learned a lot from your session. I was just wondering about the notion of social presence, and to what extent does it depend on the materiality of the medium itself? Or the affordances of the medium, and what about say in the physical classroom and related to say the use of various types of technology? Would you also think about that in relation to social presence as well?
Yes, there's a lot of overlap. I think in in-person classrooms we use the word rapport a bit more than the concept of social cognitive. It was really to be able to identify them, but I think that the framework can be applied to in-person settings. And there is a lot of importance of the materiality and how the modes afford you to do that, but that comes from kind of the earlier definitions, what the affordances are, allowing you to do things. But I guess if we can increase our multimodal competencies and how to use this affordance as well, it's not always what the materiality allows us to do, but it's also about knowing how to use those affordances as well. So I like to bring the light back to the skills of the individuals to be able to use the materiality of the affordances. But you start with the materiality first, so it is really, really connected. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. I guess time is up. Okay. Thank you very much again. And then the speaker is going to stick around for a while. Okay, at least for today and tomorrow. So if you have some further questions, feel free to talk to Professor Sattar. Okay, all right. All right, thank you very much.